Am I too early?
No, you're absolutely fine. Hi, everybody.
Oh, at 8. I expected it to be at 8:30.
No, we are live now. We're just starting. I'm hoping everybody's here. We are going to ask you to make sure you are muted and that your cameras are turned off, because we have so many participants that we'll have a technical glitch if you have your camera switched on. So if you wouldn't mind switching off, that would be great. And I think we're ready to start. So just a couple of technical things to run through for you at first. We are welcoming people on Zoom via Eventbrite tonight. We're also live streaming to XR UK, and we will be on YouTube. This meeting or conference is being recorded. Just need to let you know that. And unfortunately, we've heard from one of our speakers today, Nihan from Turkey, is unable to come because she's had a medical emergency in her family. And she has sent us a short film, so we're going to embed that in Dave Lane's talk a little bit later in the evening. Also, because we have so many participants, we would ask if you have a question for either Dave, who is our sustainability officer, who's going to be talking later, or for Nina Schrank, who is a plastics campaigner at Greenpeace UK. Put your question in the chat if you're in the Zoom, and if you're live streaming, we also have someone monitoring the live stream feedback. So if you have a question, pop it onto the comments, and we will put your questions to our speakers at the Q&A, which will be at the end. That's basically it. Couple more technical things. I'm going to put a link to a Google document for Plastics Rebellion. It's got our email address. If you're inspired to come and join us, please do. We need more people on board. The net's closing in on the plastics polluters. You can feel it. There's a story coming out every week in the press. Just this week, we've had a story on microplastics acting as hubs for all kinds of pathogens and bacteria. That's in a science journal just this week. We've also had a big story in The Guardian this week about phthalates in plastics production, leading to fertility problems, so drastic, in fact, that by 2045, the piece in The Guardian is suggesting that all couples wanting to conceive are going to have to do so artificially if plastics proliferate the way they're already doing. So, welcome to our event. It's called the Great Plastics Recycling Swindle. I think it's fairly obvious why we've called it that. We're hoping tonight to explain to not only people who are not environmentalists that plastic recycling is a sham, but also to environmentalists. And the belief that your plastic waste is being recycled at the moment seems to be the biggest barrier to change. And by change, we mean getting a drastic reduction in plastics. At Plastics Rebellion, we have 3 demands. They're pretty simple. The first one is to tell the truth. So we want government and industry to tell the truth, which is that we're drowning in plastic. Plastic recycling is an utter sham. We're going to demonstrate tonight. The only answer is a massive reduction in our use of plastics. Second demand is act now. We want manufacturing of non-essential plastics to end by 2025. And our third demand is for citizens' assemblies, fully legislative, fully informed citizens' assemblies on plastics to determine which are essential plastics and how waste plastics should be dealt with and by whom. So I think we're going to go to our first speaker, who is Marion Ledesma. She's from Greenpeace in the Philippines, and she has a film to show us.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Marian Ledesma from Greenpeace Philippines. Today, I'll be sharing about the recycling myth and how it's impacting communities on the ground in countries like the Philippines. So recycling is the supposed answer to plastic pollution that corporations and the plastic industry has paraded in front of the public for decades. But truthfully, recycling has failed us. We're still extracting fossil fuels from the ground to make plastic products. And the volume and quality of recycled plastic is still nowhere near what's necessary to replace many of the virgin plastic in manufacturing. Also, only 9% of all plastic waste ever produced has been recycled. And that's a fact that has often been said and repeated because a lot of people don't realize just how ineffective recycling really is. It's a false solution to the plastic crisis and a longstanding threat to the true systems change that's needed to address the crisis. It also has impacts on the global south and impacts it in a way many people in developed countries might not realize. Now, you can't talk about recycling nowadays without mentioning waste trade, because in a lot of developed countries, these two things are interlinked. Both multi-billion-dollar industries have a detrimental impact on nations receiving the waste. The waste trade drives false solutions like recycling and incineration with the promise of profits and this allure of convenience that wealthier nations can get rid of their waste by sending them away. But when it comes to the plastic crisis, there is no such thing as a way. By shipping their trash to lower income countries, rich countries just externalize the costs, the negative impacts of their waste to countries like mine. And if you've noticed, there have been a lot of reports on how recycling rates are going up, but the truth is behind all that, there are still waste being shipped out to countries that don't really recycle these wastes. The EU reported 31% of plastic waste collected in 2016 as recycled, but much of those recyclables were in fact exported to developing countries where there are either looser regulations or lower safety and environmental standards or poor infrastructure. And it's the global south that are shouldering the costs of failed recycling systems in many ways. Along with the shipped waste and even recyclables, health and environmental impacts are being transferred to communities in the receiving countries. There are also waste management expenses that are being transferred to local governments here for waste that isn't even ours. And of course, you have to ask, right? With recyclables being shipped to lower income nations, is there a guarantee that they're actually getting recycled? Are they being processed properly? Are they being handled safely or disposed of with sound ecological waste management approaches? Are they even ending up in recycling facilities? Well, for more than a few cases, the answer is no. It's definitely not as advertised. No, they don't get processed properly. No, they're not handled safely or disposed of ecologically in any or some cases. No, they don't get recycled like you think they do. So some waste ends up in illegal facilities, like the one pictured here. And they're essentially backyard operations that don't have the equipment to sort or recycle waste. They don't have the manpower that's trained to do the right processes or the right operations to actually ensure that the waste that gets there gets recycled or processed, right? So some cities and companies in Europe, the US, and other developed nations transact with these illegal entities and send the waste to them without really verifying what happens to that trash. Without doing any background checks or due diligence, they don't really know what's happening to the waste. They won't be able to see if these companies can actually recycle the waste like they claim. And at these places, what happens to the waste is that they're either burned, left out in the open, or transferred to local landfills. And they don't have the safety standards for their workers who are often working there informally. They don't abide by any health or environmental regulations, and they sure as hell don't do any of these processes that we require to properly dispose of our waste. Now, in other cases, some waste does arrive here unsorted, just unsegregated or contaminated trash shoved into containers and sent here. Under law, mixed municipal waste that's shipped here is illegal too. So again, they're seized or the operations are stopped, but that's if they're caught. The reality here in the Philippines is that our customs just don't have the human resources to check every single container that gets shipped to the Philippines. And what happens is sometimes a lot of illegal waste and contaminated waste slips in through the cracks. So because of these mixed and unsorted municipal waste holding no value, if they get to facilities that aren't prepared for them, or they get to these illegal facilities or unlicensed operators, they won't take the time or spend the money to further sort these. So they're going to be sending them out to these empty fields where they're dumping the waste, or worse, in unsanctioned landfills or in other facilities that are ill-prepared to process the waste. And if these illegal operators or importers are exposed or are caught by authorities, they usually abandon the sites and the waste altogether. And then you have exporting nations and companies just flat out refusing to take responsibility. So the waste is just left out there. In the past, we've had countries blatantly refuse responsibility for taking their illegal waste back and refuse to accept the waste, even though the Philippines has asked them to re-export the trash. And of course, while these governments are arguing over responsibility and handling and re-exportation, and companies are being charged by the authorities, the waste just sits there in areas unsuitable for waste disposal. And in some cases, the legal process and the bilateral disputes take years. So the waste is just slowly contaminating the surrounding environment at these disposal sites and becoming the problem of nearby communities. Other times, they get transported to our own city landfills, adding to the ever-increasing waste here. Then there are also cases where waste is legally transported and received, but upon inspection at legitimate recycling facilities, the waste is either found to be contaminated or contaminated with other substances, so making them unsuitable for recycling, or they're too low in value or quality to be considered useful in the process. So what these legitimate entities do is that they chuck them as well. And the waste again ends up in landfills or open areas that aren't suitable for waste. So by now you're sort of seeing a pattern here. Whether legitimate or not, there's always a chance where your recyclables could just end up out in the environment in open areas for communities to be exposed to, and or in city landfills, so that local governments have to deal with them. And that's a reality of what could happen to your recyclables or city waste that end up here. And of course, there are grave impacts. This facility pictured here caught fire in 2019. It's not an open dump site as it would seem, but it's actually a waste disposal and recycling facility for imported waste. And it eventually got shut down. And while authorities were going through the process of charging those that were responsible, and the Philippine government was negotiating with the developed country that sent the waste, what happened was that accidental combustion occurred around August 2019, and this accidental burning actually exposed residents and workers in the area because it's both a residential and partially industrial zone. It ended up exposing residents and workers to toxins that were released from the burned waste. And of course, burning is not always accidental. Some waste and recycling get sent to illegal facilities which intentionally burn them. But whether it's an accident or intentional, persistent organic pollutants like dioxins and furans and other hazardous chemicals are released into the air, soil, and groundwater during the burning process. And these chemicals have been associated with a variety of health conditions, ranging from cardiologic to inflammatory, from neurological to developmental. And they affect people of different ages. So everything from fetal development to the point where you're an older adult, you could be exposed to these health hazards when you live so close to these plastic recycling and disposal sites. But even if they're not burnt, shipped waste remaining in open dump sites can still contaminate the groundwater and surrounding land. Environmental plastic can easily leach toxic additives or concentrate toxins that are already in the environment, and allowing people to become directly or indirectly exposed. And these toxins, along with microplastics, can also enter our food chain through agricultural soils, terrestrial and aquatic food sources, and the water supply. So our communities are always at risk. So whether by inhalation of contaminated air, direct contact with contaminated soil or water, or the ingestion of food that's been grown in an environment polluted with toxins, or in an environment that's in proximity to these dump sites, people's health and food supply are at risk by foreign waste that's sent here. And of course, there's always waste management expenses that go along with accepting recycling waste. Local governments and communities, when these sites become abandoned by the illegal operators or the unlicensed operators, local governments and communities eventually shoulder the expenses from these imported waste. Some municipalities have to send waste to their own landfills, basically footing the bill for transport and waste management. There's even been a case where a community in the south of the Philippines that people had to donate their own money for the re-exportation of waste. So they had to pay for the waste to be shipped back from where it came from, because the developed country where the trash originated refused to pay for it. So yeah, and then of course, last but not the least is the environmental impact on lower income nations receiving the waste. Water and land adjacent to or downstream from plastic disposal or processing sites can be contaminated with solid waste. and substances leaching from those waste. So what we're seeing here is that the pollution of land and air and water near these sites have resulted in environmental degradation. There's the destruction of ecosystems from the waste to contend with, as well as wildlife that's harmed when they get trapped or ingest waste. There's also a big chance that biodiversity loss could result to waste being continuously sent here and left out in these environments. So with looking at all the impacts, I know it's a pretty bleak picture, but something can be done about it. While we call for the ratification of the Basel Ban Amendment and a comprehensive ban on waste trade or waste importation here in the Philippines, the global community can help us out too, and also other lower income nations that are accepting waste. And they can do so by 5 things, really. First is investigating the recycling industry in plastic exporting countries, making sure that they're catching fraudulent or illegal practices. And action has to be taken against recycling companies or government agencies that knowingly export plastic and hazardous waste to unlicensed operators in low or middle income countries. The next is the world can enact legislation requiring local councils and recycling companies in countries that export waste to conduct due diligence on importers that are receiving the waste in developing countries. And if these companies don't comply, significant penalties have to be given for failing to do their due diligence and their background checks. Another thing is that countries should put in place policies and programs that aim to reduce the use and production of single-use plastics. So from plastic bans to ecological solid waste management regulations or programs, policy and programs can be implemented. So things like more landfills, incineration, and recycling become completely unnecessary to manage waste. The fourth action involves corporations. The whole life cycle of plastic, from the point where we're pulling out fossil fuels out of the ground to disposal and wastage, has impacts. Every single stage of plastic's life has impacts, and to truly put an end to the plastic crisis means that we have to stop the flow of plastic waste at the source. So we need to demand corporations stop producing single-use plastic packaging for their products. And lastly, we have to work towards a just and green recovery after the pandemic, and call for investments when we build back better, investments in solutions such as reuse and refill systems, so we don't go back to business as usual. The plastic crisis is a systemic issue that spans the globe, and it fuels the climate emergency. But we have the solutions at hand, and collectively we can make our governments and the corporations who are responsible accountable, so that they do their part to implement, scale up, and institutionalize these solutions. Now, I wish I could have joined you for this Plastics Rebellion event live to answer your questions if you have them, but with our time differences, it wasn't possible. If you do have questions, feel free to reach out to me by email. And if you want to know more about waste trade and the fallacies of recycling, please check out the Greenpeace Philippines website. I hope that you guys have great discussions during this event, and I'm looking forward to hearing all about the actions and plans that you'll have moving forward.
Fantastic, and thanks to Marion, even though she's Sorry, I think I'm muted. No, I'm not. Thanks to Marion, even though she's not here. I will put Marion's email address in the chat at towards the end, and you will be able to email any questions you have to her. We've also got Nina from Greenpeace UK, who's their plastics campaigner, who's going to be talking after Dave Lane, who is an ex-sustainability officer, also a member of Extinction Rebellion. Interestingly, picking up on what Marion was talking about, all the waste that the UK government is in charge of exporting to poorer countries who don't have the infrastructure to recycle them is classified as having been recycled, which is obviously farcical. And yeah, obviously plastic is polluting at every single stage in its life. So manufacturing is leaching out toxins. There's been a piece recently by people who live in Louisiana in a place called Cancer Alley, which is a 150-mile stretch of plastics processing plants, petrochemical processing plants. Even before it gets to the cracking stage, where it's actually manufactured into polyethylene, it's mostly relying on fracked shale gas from the USA. And all of the ways of disposing of plastic, as we know, are pretty dreadful. Landfill, as Marion was saying, leaches out synthetic estrogens, it entombs food and increases methane emissions. Litter in the environment obviously can actually mechanically kill animals by strangulation or by ingestion. Also microplastics, and incineration also is hugely problematic. It's carbon intensive, leaches out more toxins into the air that we breathe. And this leaves the government still pushing recycling as the top of the trinity that used to be reduce, reuse, recycle. As we know, the government is still pushing recycling, despite the fact only 9% of plastics are actually getting recycled. That's 9%. And also there's a big push that the plastics industry are putting a lot of research into, which is chemical recycling, which I think Nina will be able to talk about a little bit later. But as yet, it's an untried technology. So relying on it is about as hopeful as relying on carbon capture. But anyway, our next speaker is Dave. Dave Lane is a member of Plastics Rebellion. He joined us after finding us on Facebook, and we were quite excited when he joined. Dave used to be a sustainability officer. He has been, he's decided to stop his curbside recycling. He's going to explain to you why. Dave, I think you need to switch your camera on if you haven't already.
I have.
Excellent. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm rather glad I can't see all your faces. I can just see mine at the moment. I would be rather terrified if I could. The fact that so many people might be listening to me is a bit scary. I want to start before I tell you a little bit about who I am. Thank you, Jackie. Before I start by telling you exactly who I am, I want to start by telling you what I'm going to tell you tonight, because for a lot of people in the green movement, the message that I'm pushing, which is not exclusively my message at all, is quite controversial. And the message is essentially that it isn't necessarily plastics that are the problem, or that plastic recycling is broken, but actually the recycling of plastics per se is environmentally devastating, and is of itself a terrible thing to do. So I'm not just saying that the problem with recycling plastic is that the rates are very low. To be honest with you, if the rates were 90% recycling, I would still be bitterly opposed to recycling. So I'm going to come on a little bit shortly, and I'm going to tell you why and what that's all about. But before I do all that, I just wanted to give you a very quick rundown as to who I am, because of course none of you know who I am. I'm just some bloke on a computer screen chatting to you tonight. My name is Dave Lane. I am a local government officer in Northamptonshire, and although I'm not really involved in sustainable development so much now, it is something that I've historically done. I went into local government in the early 2000s after leaving university with a couple of politics degrees. I was a member of the Green Party for 20 years, and I sat on the national body, the Green Party's regional council, as an East Midlands representative. And I also project managed the largest volunteer-led community retrofit to a community building that's ever been undertaken in the UK. So I really was that person who was very much into the idea of individual actions can make a big difference and can save us from climate change. So if you want to know what the face of one of those people who really bought into that individualistic lifestyle agendas, you're looking at him. It was me. And I've completely moved away from that. In fact, I've moved away from that to the extent that I often say now that if you drive a Bentley and fly around in a Learjet, if you turn up at an Extinction Rebellion event and glue on or chain yourself to something, you're actually going to be doing more than the environment than fitting solar panels to your house or fitting solid wall insulation or recycling. The time for individual lifestyle changes is done. We had our chance after the Kyoto Protocol and the Rio Earth Summit in '92. We had our chance to go for sustainable development. We haven't taken it. So we now have to start making radical changes, and individual lifestyle choices will not work. And it's this sort of thinking and philosophy that's really led me to question a lot of the things that I do and to start researching a lot of them quite heavily. And it brought me very much on to plastics. I mentioned earlier I've done a couple of politics degrees, and it's that sort of socio-political element of recycling that bothers me more than the facts. We've just had a very good presentation from Marion, and she presented all the facts and figures that I think most of us know is true, that plastic recycling is completely wrecked. But I want to now move on to tell you that it's actually impossible. We can't recycle plastic. There are various reasons. Excuse me, just having some water. Not only are all the plastics we have produced from various different chemicals that can't be separated out, but actually, if you do take, let's take your polypropylene milk bottle, and let's say you recycle it once, then you recycle it twice. By the time you get on to the second and third time, the recycling process has damaged the polymer makeup of the polypropylene so much that it cannot continually be recycled. And the only way that it can be made into another product is to add virgin plastic material. So the recycling process drives virgin plastic production. You cannot recycle without producing more plastic. I also have been thinking recently that we tend to think of recycling plastic as a sort of a 1 or 2 time event. Some of you may be aware that plastic milk bottles are occasionally made into fleeces that we all wear in the winter. I mean, of course, the big question is, what's going to happen to that fleece in 5, 6, 7 years of use? Ultimately, it's going to go to landfill. And herein lies the fundamental problem with plastic. You can only recycle any type of plastic that is recyclable X amount of times, 2, 3, 4 times. After that, you can't recycle it anymore. The recycling process requires the addition of virgin plastic materials. So therefore, recycling drives the plastic industry. Ultimately, whatever you produce from plastic, and there are absolutely no exceptions, is always at some point in the future going to end up back in the waste stream. And the waste stream that it's going to end up in is either presently landfill or incineration, because as I've already said, things cannot be recycled over and over again. The recycling story starts back in the 1950s and the 1960s in the United States, where the plastic production companies, realizing that there was a burgeoning environmental movement, and particularly after the moon landing of 1969, where we all had that image of the Earth. And it's that image being back to Earth that is often cited as the birth of the global environment movement, when we realized how small and fragile and insignificant our planet was as bobbling about in space. So the plastic industry had realized that they had to try and do something. So they came up with this concept of recycling, and they did a class A job on all of us, and particularly on me, I admit it, a really class A job on me, convincing us that we can go out and buy all the plastics we want because we could recycle them. And just today, in my own bathroom, is a Tresemme bottle, and it says recyclable bottle. This is evidence, if you need any more, that the plastic industry tells us that their products that they're flogging us are recyclable, and therefore we, in all good conscience, can go out and buy their plastic products, because once we've used them for the once or two times, we can just throw everything into the recycling container and it will be taken away and it will be recycled. Well, not only do we know that actually in real life it isn't recycled, but hopefully, as I've explained, that recycling cannot actually happen over and over again. So plastic is specifically not sustainable. So the plastic industry needs to recreate itself. It needs to keep developing itself. And the way it is doing so is to sell us products that claim that it can be recycled. More recently, some of you may have noticed that some of the supermarkets who are aware that we as consumers are getting sick to the back teeth of single-use plastics have started to adopt soft plastic recycling schemes within their supermarkets. So Tesco's, Sainsbury's are two companies who are doing this. The idea is that you can take your cellophane and your soft plastic wrapping back to the supermarket, and they will send it off and they will recycle it. And of course, what they will do is they will make it into new plastic packaging. We will all feel fantastic about ourselves because we don't need to be worrying about stopping single-use plastic because, hey, we can recycle the bloody stuff. Well, we can't. If the plastics, the soft plastics that you take back to the supermarket are sent off to a recycling facility, let's say Tesco's invest in a whole recycling facility just for their own soft plastics, they will recycle it into new plastic packaging. And as I've said, they will have to add virgin plastic to the process, driving the virgin plastic trade. So it is with great sadness that I have had to decide in our household that we are no longer recycling plastics at all. We put everything into the black bin. The black bin goes to landfill. A few people are talking about shampoo bars and things. Yes, I use a shampoo bar. This is actually a really old plastic bottle that's been here for months. It's empty. We don't throw it away. I'm not going to throw it away. I'm going to try and find something to do with it, maybe grow some plants or something in it. That's a sidetrack. So the supermarkets will perpetuate their own plastic myth, their own plastic idea that you can carry on reusing all their materials over and over again because we can safely recycle it. And as I've explained, we can't. The $64,000 question, the one that's been tackling me, particularly once I've started no longer recycling plastic and actually knowingly landfill is that I feel guilty. I feel terrible about recycling, about binning off my plastic and not recycling it, because I too have been brainwashed. It's ingrained in me. I'm as green as the next person. I try and still make all the lifestyle changes that I know still don't work. And so I've been trying to think of the next phase. We keep seeing films and we hear presentations about how bad recycling is and how it's failed. And we know the science. I think most of you here tonight are probably going to be quite well aware of many of the things that Marion was talking about a few moments ago, that some of the issues of plastic being recycled, recycled plastic apparently being shipped off to other countries where it enters water streams and it gets wrecked and crushed down and develops into microplastics getting into the oceans. We know all of this. So the $64,000 question is, what are we going to do about it? This is where things get difficult. I openly admit it. And this is where I'm having lots of debates and arguments with members of Greenpeace that I know who don't agree with me. For my mind, I think that the first thing we've got to do is we have to break this connection, this feeling that by recycling, we are doing something good. And bearing in mind that we're not. And that once we start rejecting recycling, we then start putting political pressure onto the government to start to legislate to outlaw single-use plastics wherever possible. Now, I openly admit there are some plastics that we need. I have a laptop open in front of me, and it's thermoplastic, and it kind of needs to be. I don't think it would work too well if the keyboard was made out of wood or slate. But there's a whole host of other plastics that are totally unnecessary, that we really, really don't need. And as long as we continue with the recycling myth, we will continue, the world will continue to buy more and more plastics. Once we break the myth, then only then we will really start to look back at renewing and reusing and not recycling as much as possible. Okay. I've got some notes that I've been looking at, and I think I've covered most of the things that I want to say, but I just want to reiterate the key message. Plastic recycling is wrong. It's not just that the system is broken, the actual mechanical process of recycling plastics is deleterious to the environment and is damaging. We have to stop plastic recycling because it is the only way that we are going to eventually stop and tackle virgin recycling use. So I'm going to wrap up in a moment, but before I do, I've been very aware that throughout this, I've positioned a sign behind me. On Saturday, this Saturday, across the country, there are demonstrations against the new police and crime bill. And I hope Plastics Rebellion will excuse me tonight if I just for a couple of minutes besiege you all to consider this. This is a bill that is not against violent protesters. We have laws for that. It is against single protesters. It is against noisy protesters. Behind me, I've had this board made up, and I'm going to later tonight pop out and I'm going to stick it on some railings outside of Northamptonshire Police Headquarters. So in the morning, when their bobbies are driving to and about, they will see this, and hopefully they will have good conscience and recognise, just as the Chief Constable, the former Chief Constable of Durham Police has recognised, that this is a bill too far. This takes us too close to a police state. So I hope you don't mind me making this point, but I suspect that a lot of you will agree with this. But please look in your local areas to see if there are any protests that you can join safely, obviously with social distancing in place, because the lockdown is still, well, it's almost over, but we still have to be very, very careful. So if you do go to a protest, social distance at all times, please. And with that, I'm going to wrap up and I'm going to hand back to Janet. And if I'll take any questions if anybody has them later. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dave. And thank you for linking to the fact that we are Indeed, we are an activist group. We do direct actions. That is our unique selling point. And I'm seeing from the chat, a lot of people are saying, you know, what do we do about all this? Once you understand this terrible knowledge that, as Dave was saying, recycling's broken, we're exporting it where it makes the global south suffer even more severely than we are at the moment. The main problem is that the actual system itself doesn't work. Plastic can't be recycled, whatever they tell you. There is a great quote from the ex-CEO of what in the USA is the equivalent of the British Plastics Federation, and he said, if the public believe in recycling, then they won't worry so much about the environment. So the plastics industry and the government want us to believe in it. It's in their own interest, because the plastics industry is set to triple in production if it carries on at the same rate by 2050. So yes, if you want to do something about it, we are definitely going to be trying to do something about it. We need to take this to industry. They're the big baddies, but of course they're in bed with the government. The government are bailing out companies like INEOS. During the pandemic, INEOS was, you probably won't even know about this, but INEOS were bailed out for a secret sum up to £30 million. We're not absolutely sure how much they got. The British Plastics Federation are ecstatic. I think somebody in the chat just mentioned it was Tansy that yes, the pandemic has seen an even bigger proliferation of single-use plastics items. So yeah, what we do is we go and we make a big noise about it. We're taking our protest to INEOS, who are frantically greenwashing their polluting by sponsoring cycle teams. They have super yachts in the America's Cup. They sponsored the daily mile that most British primary school children's run every morning. So they're pretty good at greenwashing themselves and appearing to be squeaky clean. So yeah, join Plastics Rebellion. We're going to make some noise. Restrictions are lifting soon. It didn't stop us before. We actually did a protest outside INEOS during lockdown, socially distanced. We had a risk assessment. The police shut us down. We're not going to let that stop us, because we feel that this is so important. We need to get the message out there that recycling's a sham. It's broken. It doesn't work. People need to start getting angry about it, and then we can really put some pressure on government and industry to change their ways. So our next speaker is Nina from Greenpeace UK. I will let you introduce yourself, Nina. Over to you.
Hi everyone. I can't seem to turn my camera on. The host has stopped it apparently, which is you, Janet, I believe.
Oh my goodness. I think it's Richard. I think you should appear shortly. Let me have a look. Richard, if you're there, or Matt, are we able to enable Nina's camera? There she is.
Hello. My internet's a bit dodgy, so I'll turn it off if I get a message on screen. Anyway, yes, hi everybody. My name is Nina Schrank and I'm the lead campaigner on plastics for Greenpeace UK. I want to say thanks so much for having me here. I'm going to keep it light because so much has been said, and what brilliant presentations from Marion and Dave, covering so much there. So I'm just here to wrap up really, and I've got a few slides which I will try and show you now. Let's try and do that. Okay, no, if I can't do screen sharing, that's fine, I'll just talk. Shall I just keep talking? Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so
Nina,
what I wanted to do was...
Nina, hi, this is Richard. Yeah, I've just made you a co-host, so you can share your screen now if you want.
Okay, thank you. Great. Okay, can everybody see that situation in the UK? Give me a nod, Janet, because you're all I can see.
Yeah. Yeah, it's there.
Good, right.
Looking good.
So situation in the UK, I mean, you know, as I said, brilliant presentations, but let's look at what's going on here. So the UK is the second biggest per capita user of plastic packaging in the world, second only to the US. That means that each person in this country is handling an enormous amount of plastic. It's massive difference on those scales what's happening, particularly when it comes to exports and ocean pollution. The government, have we heard, now there is an often reported stat from the government, 46% of plastic is recycled. It's being repeated by people in very high profile positions in governments. It is not at all true. It's the percentage of plastic that's in weeks of digging earlier this year is that it's much more likely in this country to be less than 10% of plastic that's actually so-called recycled. And Dave has obviously taken us through why plastics recycling isn't a solution anyway, but this is really calling out government lies here, that we're having this stat thrown at the British public, which is completely inaccurate. We know what's happening to the other 90%. Well, it's being landfilled in this country, it's being incinerated in this country, it's being exported. And the top country for XPK is at the moment Turkey. And I can come on to that in a bit. Escape routes for plastic waste exports is the most destructive to our environment and to human health, as we've heard. Really deeply flawed and up there with a national scandal status, but it's become a blocker to change. And I think that's really key. Supermarkets know that the public care about recycling. Government know this too. The more they talk about it as a solution, as Dave said, the more it becomes fact. And it's been, you know, they've been talking about it since the 50s. And really what it is it's about keeping the status quo. Like this is, you know, this is, and what the status quo looks like is a continual pumping out plastic, to the extent that plastic production is going to the ocean. So it's a pretty unbelievable situation we're facing, given the huge public concern about plastic over the last few years. And I think, you know, plastic has become a symbol of our throwaway culture in our society like no other. And it's, you know, the throwaway society, plastic is you know, the biggest chunk, you know, in terms of other materials being used, aluminium, glass, paper, you know, plastic is the big one. Despite being this, you know, magic material which never degrades, real material it is. And we already know about the deadly impacts of plastic pollution in our oceans. We've got, you know, stats, 100,000 sea creatures, you know, we've got, I mean, hundreds of thousands of sea creatures killed each year, from endangered turtles to seals, whales, dolphins, and seabirds. And we've recently heard back in December that plastic packaging and plastic bags are the most deadly type of plastic in the ocean, which is like another wake-up call, if we needed any other, about, you know, about the need to reduce throwaway plastic packaging. Now, Turkey, as I said, is our biggest export country, and we've seen that there's a real direct link to the sea from Turkey. We've got in the southern Turkish region of Adana, there's rubbish being piled up next to waterways, which are flowing into two major rivers, which flow straight into the Mediterranean Sea. And that stretch of coastline is the most polluted in Europe. And the Mediterranean is already highly polluted with plastics, and is in a dire state when it comes to overfishing. And since it's in an enclosed sea, its species are all the more isolated and therefore vulnerable because they can't be renewed. You know, and the awful human health impacts. This is an emergency. I mean, if we were exporting our waste to Scandinavia and there were Norwegian children getting nosebleeds and respiratory diseases and headaches so severe they couldn't go to school, the world would be up in arms. But we're dealing with such an out of sight, out of mind, post-colonial attitude here from this government and others in Europe and the US. It's absolutely shocking. As so many of you I saw, what we need to do, I mean, this is where we turn to solutions. I mean, the government needs to step in. We need mandated reductions. It's not enough to expect supermarkets to voluntarily do it, although Sainsbury's and Aldi have committed to 50% reductions. The government needs to step in the Environment Bill, which is coming up, and do this for us. We need a system shift. We need a fundamental shift to reuse models so that packaging stays in a system and out of the environment. Obviously, you know, we all know this. We need more loose fruit and veg. Just checking my notes. And you know, just going back to reuse quickly. I mean, there are all kinds of ways you reuse, and there are so many categories which you can do this to massive effect, like water, all kinds of drinks and milk. So there's obvious potential there, which is not yet being explored. And also online shopping, which brings huge opportunity for reuse. It means products can be dropped off on the doorstep in reusable containers, and at the same time, empties can be picked up. We also need to make sure that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And we know that billions of bottles are dumped and burned each year. And bottles can be turned back into bottles. They can be recycled, unbelievably. So we need a deposit return scheme, which has just been horribly delayed by the government by a few years, so that we can keep bottles it's worked to such good effect in Germany, deposit returns. And it's also the entry point to reuse, because you can start using these vending machines to collect. We need to ban waste or exports from this country, and I'll come back to in just a second. And we need to beware of false solutions like chemical recycling, which is a really intentionally vague term used by the industry to refer to all kinds of technologies which promise to convert plastic waste into its basic chemical building blocks to generate new plastic. But often that means that plastic is turned into jet fuel and waxes, so not actually recycling. It's like a kind of a term which is through it, but it is most certainly, from where we're coming from and many others, a false solution, which is basically stop the real change that needs to happen, i.e. huge reductions and the shift to reuse. So what's happening next? Well, we're just about to launch a new campaign in 2 weeks, calling for the government to stop dumping our waste on other countries, to cut the UK single-use plastic by 50% by 2025, and to roll out this bottle deposit return scheme, which will give our Turkish office to hope that these change makers and activists from within these countries get to tell their stories and push for change, because that's where these are the experts, people from these countries, as we've heard from Marion, and they need a voice in this country. So more on that. Watch this space, basically, for that campaign. And on that, I will stop sharing and hand over to you, Janet. Thank you, everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nina. I think we are so stretched on our cameras that you were breaking up slightly, but we didn't want to stop you from sharing those amazing slides. So I mean, I could understand what you were saying. I hope everyone else could. I'm sure they could. We had quite a few questions during that, so in a minute we're going to go to a question and answer session. We did have a film that Nihan had sent to us from Turkey. Nihan was sadly unable to make the Zoom tonight because she has a medical emergency, but she has sent us a film. I'm hoping, Richard, that you can run that film in now.
A BBC investigation has found that plastic waste from Britain that's supposed to be sent to Turkey for recycling is instead being dumped there and in some cases burnt. The UK exports more plastic waste to Turkey than to any other country. Environmentalists say Turkey can't even recycle its own waste, so shouldn't be importing more. Angus Crawford reports.
Wading through plastic, dumped on an industrial scale. filmed just before lockdown, all this was sent here for recycling. But now it lines the streets of Adana in southern Turkey. And some of it's a long way from home.
British beef stewing steak. What's this? Union Jack. There's some ham. £3 for two. Last year, the UK sent more than 160,000 tonnes of waste plastic to be recycled here in Turkey. Does this look like recycling?
We watch as bag after bag arrives. This Syrian boy says they were given the rubbish and just told to get rid of it. Once dumped, it's often burned. This fire lasted for 2 weeks.
It was very hard to breathe.
Black smoke covering the area.
This whole thing is not just our waste. We're drowning in other people's crap right now.
We found British waste dumped on sites across the city.
Help keep Britain tidy, reuse this bag to protect the environment.
English people are carefully separating out their waste. But I think someone should come here and follow up to see how it's actually being disposed of.
Think we can take a left here?
Black smoke, more plastic, much of it British.
Sainsbury's pita bread packaging being burnt in the middle of southeast Turkey.
But what about the effects on the wider environment? Our guide is Sedat Gundogdu, an expert on plastic pollution.
So could some of this come from British waste?
Could be.
He takes me to one of the most polluted beaches on the Mediterranean and has a message for British families.
They are feeling that they are doing something for environment because they are sorting cards, plastics, metals, other things. They should know it's not going to recycle. It's coming to our city in dump area.
So why is this happening? The UK now sends more plastic waste to Turkey than to any other country. Thousands of tonnes a month bought and shipped here to be recycled. And that trade has carried on during the COVID crisis.
3,000 tonnes.
This is how it should be done. British bottles, sorted, cleaned and melted down. All of it, at every step, audited and tracked. But in the back streets of industrial towns, a cottage industry has also grown up. Good and bad quality plastic all mixed together. And who's tracking that? And there are real fears waste stockpiled during COVID will now flood the market.
After this lockdown, all this waste will be dumped to Turkey. It makes me really worrying and depressed and angry.
New dump sites full of other countries' waste, filmed just this month. It's a problem the British and Turkish authorities say they want to clean up, but the shipments just keep coming. Angus Crawford, BBC News, Southern Turkey.
Muted. Hi everybody. So that was the film that Nihan sent. Sadly she couldn't make it, but clearly Turkey is taking the brunt of our recycling, which of course can't be recycled. We are going to move very shortly to some questions and answers. I've got 11 questions so far. I'm just noting that there's one all about TerraCycle. We've had one already about TerraCycle. Just a couple of things to let you know, which is the first one is I've already popped it in the chat once, but we have a Google document that has lots of up-to-date articles about some of the stuff we've been talking about for you to read. Also some really good videos, not the ones you've already seen. We can pop those in as well if you want to see them again or share them. We also are going to provide you with some PDFs for posters that you can print out yourself. They are for fly posting. So you can make yourself up some nice flour and water paste and get out into your local neighbourhood and do some activism. It's lockdown friendly, socially distanced. You can do it all on your own or with one other person, or even 6 other people now, I think, which you're allowed to do as part of your exercise. You can move your hands really fast when you're doing it. So we'll be sending out those PDFs. Included in the Google document is the email address for Plastics Rebellion. I will share it in the chat during the question and answer session as well. We really need lots more people on board. Our aim is obviously to end all plastic and start a regenerative zero waste culture. But in the meantime, we will be happy for some people to set up their own local groups, take direct action with us. Direct action is probably going to be happening in London at places like the British Plastics Federation, INEOS and DEFRA. So if you haven't made the radical transformation into direct action, we are inviting you to do so. The time is now. We're running out of time. There's lots of legislation on the brink of going through that will tie us into incineration contracts for the next 30 years if we're not careful. And incineration is a monster that needs feeding with plastic. So we have to get active now. We have to raise public awareness about this because this is the big lie. So without further ado, I think we've got questions that hopefully Nina and or Dave will be able to answer. So if are we able to all be on screen without our audio going funny? Let's see if this works. And Matt, if you can hear me, if you can make a note of any more questions in the chat, because I'm going to minimize my chat so that I can read out these questions that I've got. So the first question was from Alex, and sorry Alex, I didn't make a note whether you were he or she or they, but they are asking whether recyclable, compostable and biodegradable plastics are all they're cracked up to be. What actually happens to biodegradable or compostable plastics? I don't know who wants to answer that. Put your hand up if you think you've got an answer. It's either Dave or Nina.
Okay, I'll have a go. I'm sure Nina will also be able to give an answer. From my point of view, I have been highly skeptical of the science behind biodegradable plastics. For example, we've had biodegradable plastic bags, supermarket plastic bags in the system for many years. Many of them have been buried in the ground and after a few years have been pulled up in perfectly good usable condition. So there is a very big question mark about whether the science of the materials is there. There are containers that can be made from materials that are more biodegradable, but they are not going to be made from petrochemical materials as is with normal plastics. So I'm going to say I really do not believe the idea of petrochemical based plastics can scientifically be made into something that is biodegradable. And of course I'm now hoping Nina doesn't come back and tell me that I'm completely wrong and actually there's a new wonder product out there.
I'm going to agree with you. I think I'm going to turn my camera off so you might be able to hear me better.
Great.
I was just going to say anything compostable, biodegradable looks like it does need to biodegrade in industrial set conditions rather than people's home costing or even home compost bins or as in their gardens. So it's definitely a labelling issue. Like it's another kind of a slightly smoke and mirrors game, I think, with that. And anything made from a plant source takes up, land use is a big issue with a growing population. Anything which is, any land used to make packaging, you have to question whether that's the right way for land to be used, and it needs to be making, you know, food if it's going to be cultivated in that way. So I would say, you know, that's a ridiculous use of land. And also the way that a lot of these plastics interact in the marine environment is exactly the same as standard fossil fuel plastic, because they don't break down easily. They can be eaten, ingested, you know, choke marine life. And so, yeah, ultimately it's a kind of like another type of plastic pollution in the sea. So I think that's probably answered it between us.
Perfect. Thank you. We've got another question from Saray, Recycling Janine. Sorry if I've written that down badly. Will local councils ever be fined for rubbish found in other countries?
Okay, well, I feel I'm pretty safe ground with that one, working for a local authority. No, first of all, when local authorities collect curbside recycling, their job is to collect the material and to, let's say, for want of a better term, to pass it on to a recycling company, who then will take good title or legal ownership of the plastics. So local authorities are the collectors, the curbside collectors of materials that are then given, sold, traded, whatever, into other companies who then look after, allegedly look after the recycling. So this doesn't just apply to plastics, it applies to everything that is recycled. So no, local authorities would not be able to be held responsible.
Anything to add to that, Nina?
No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah, it's a government issue.
Totally.
And also the producers, it's a producer issue. This is why we need producers to pay 100% of the costs for the end of life of their products. If they're not going to reduce, then they need to pay for the cleanup.
Next question was from Glyn, asking, can we ban exporting of plastic waste?
Yeah, yes, that's what we're going to do next. Absolutely. The government is going to launch a consultation in the next year or so, but we're trying to change the terms of the debate before that even happens with this new campaign we're launching in a couple of weeks.
Brilliant. And Nina, have you actually got something we can include? We're obviously taking emails from all our Eventbrite attendees that we can include to them, or is it embargoed until you announce it?
The campaign?
Yeah. Pretty much.
Pretty much. I could send a link when we go live. We don't have the petition page live yet, otherwise I would absolutely send it to you. But as soon as it's up, I'll send you a link.
Brilliant, thank you. We have
just, on
sorry,
that point,
Dave. Yeah.
On that point, can I just urge people, when Greenpeace launch that campaign, can I besiege people to go on to that, to join into the consultation and to send in their comments and to back the Greenpeace campaign. It's a great campaign. They are looking at trying to stop the exportation of plastics, which really brings home the issue for us to have to deal with it here in the UK. It's not just about stopping the plastic going abroad, it's also about enforcing us to deal with it locally.
Brilliant, thank you, Dave. So Di's question, I guess this is going to be tricky to answer because we don't have Marion. Can the Philippines ban plastic from entering? I'm guessing that is a tricky one to answer unless you know, Nina. I know China did.
China did. Turkey is starting to restrict, but does it work is the question. Because the rules are so difficult to follow, and no one's checking the containers really, because the Environment Agency is understaffed and underfunded this end. And if they do ban like the way China banned, it's like where's it going to end up next? So it's playing past the parcel, basically, the whole thing.
Yeah. And we already know, I think there's a quote somewhere, I'm not sure if I've got it to hand, Pete Myers, who's an environmental health expert at Carnegie Mellon University, said there is no untouched centimetre. So they've even found phthalates in the bodies of ants globally, even in the remotest areas of pristine rainforest in South America. So, I mean, exactly, we can shift this problem around the world, but ultimately we're ingesting this stuff. Okay, the next question was, well, it was more of a comment actually from Tansy, who was talking about the proliferation of plastics during COVID, such as all the tests, the lateral flow stuff. I don't think it was necessarily a question, it was just a comment. Again, that's a tricky one because it brings up the essential or non-essential plastics question. Don't know if you want to comment on plastics in the healthcare sector.
Okay, I will. One of the problems with every single commodity that human beings use, what doesn't matter what it is scale, scalability. Where things are used in such short supply, their commercial value is extremely high. And where things are widely used, like plastic, their commercial value is extremely low. So if we were to hypothetically move forward 10 years, and let's say we've really hammered global plastics down by 99.9%, you are going to find that certain plastic materials are going to become very expensive, and that's where governments will have to step in. In terms of, so that would happen with medical plastics as well. So there are some areas where plastics are the only material that will work realistically, and you have to use them. What we need to focus on though with plastics is particularly everyday domestic plastics and single-use plastics.
Anything to add to that, Nina? I know I'm aware we're running low on time, actually. We've got about 10 more minutes and about 5 more questions.
Yeah, go for it. Go for your next questions.
Okie dokie. I don't actually know what kind of polymer this is. This was from Jen, who says, can PBTL, I'm presuming that's a polymer name, can be infinitely recycled? We might have to look into that. I don't know if you know about that, Dave.
Sorry, I'm just trying to work out what that particular one is. PBTL. No, I don't know that polymer compound fully. But to be honest with you, actually, it doesn't matter what it is. The answer's no. No plastic can be recycled more than a couple of times. Therefore, no plastic can be recycled at all.
Fantastic. We have Joe, who is saying, what about the recycling of paper, metal and glass? Is that relatively okay, or is that too as problematic?
Nina, I hope you don't mind if I jump in very quickly here, but I think I would like to hear what Nina has to say as well. I think each product is different. It's a little bit like drugs. Banning all drugs is to compare cannabis to heroin when they're completely radically different substances. And it's the same with plastics. Recycling of metals is a lot more commercially viable. Recycling glass is tricky, but glass is something that can be reused more. Recycling paper and cardboard is a little bit of a myth because of the contamination, particularly in cardboard. Cardboard packaging, once it has sellotape on it, it becomes contaminated. So cardboard is very difficult to recycle, although it's great to use down your allotment.
I've just lined my bean growing pots with cardboard. Not that I would ever buy anything from Amazon, but I find it all lying down my street. So yeah, it's super useful for that. Nina, do you have anything to add to that? Glass and paper and metal?
No, I think just it always comes back to reuse. I mean, one of the things we're worried about is material substitution. So replacing plastic with other materials because of the impact on forests for paper and board. The carbon impact of metal, and remelting down glass to make something new out of it doesn't make sense. We need to just move to a reuse economy, and that's the bottom line.
Totally. And we have one last question, which is from Wendy. I'm missing a question, and there were two questions about TerraCycle. I think I know a lot of environmentalists really rate TerraCycle, but again, I'm imagining, Dave, you're going to say this is just in a grand scheme for a stay of execution before plastic finally.
Yeah, it is, but on a wider note about TerraCycle, just one word: greenwashing. TerraCycle is a brand. They are a company who create this idea that they pick up on certain products, but really TerraCycle as a company is essentially a brand, and they're selling a brand to people. What they are doing is collecting certain materials, but they are having to put that into the recycling system. TerraCycle are not a company who operate recycling plants directly themselves, so they do not control the material production of recyclates that they are collecting. They're simply selling them into the market that we already know is defective. So I'm afraid TerraCycle, no, big no.
Another question here about, let me just tell everybody, if you look at the chat right now, we've got a post of the PDF so that you can do your own fly posting. It's just been posted by Michelle. It's a Google document. It's got some fantastic posters. They are black and white, really simple, direct messages. Go and plaster your local recycling area. Plaster anything you can. I had a very pleasant night out myself just a couple of nights ago with my Plastic Rebellion posters. It's quite a nice way to spend an evening after dark. Don't really need to have anyone with you. If you want someone to just keep an eye out, just to see if your friendly local police officers are strolling along, you might want to stop then. It's highly enjoyable, and you'll be spreading the word to people that the big lie is recycling is a complete scam. So I think that was, the last question was from Wendy, and it was a quick question saying, would it be helpful to have filters on washing machines to filter out micro plastics? I can imagine what Dave's going to say. Where are those plastic fibers going to go after you've taken them out of the filter?
Yeah, and what are the filters going to be made of? It's making another product to deal with recycling. And I think Nina has summed it up perfectly. We've got to rapidly move to a reduction and a reuse economy, not a recycling economy in any materials really, but especially plastic, which you can't recycle.
Another good question for XR members here. I've never been actually arrested for fly posting. Legal risks of fly posting, anyone care to answer that? I've just been told to stop when I was, the one time I've actually been approached by the police.
Okay, I can probably help with that. I am actually an XR arrestable, and I'm due in court in June, and one of the Barclaycard 6 from Northampton. Go onto YouTube and put an Extinction Rebellion Barclaycard Northampton and enjoy what we did to the Barclaycard sign with some fire extinguishers filled with fake oil. But in terms of fly posting, it is very, very rare. It's technically criminal damage. It is very, very rare to be prosecuted for fly posting. It can happen, but you've got to be careful. When you start doing it on Barclays and HSBC banks, or tackling INEOS directly, that may be different, but they may press charges. But generally speaking, you'll be pretty unlucky to get pulled up for fly posting.
Okie doke, and you can Google a lovely flour and water recipe for fly post paste. You can also, another piece of advice I got was obviously leave things like public transport alone. They're our friends, so no bus stops and no buses or tubes or public information adverts. I'm aware that we are rapidly running out of time. One last question. Greg asked, what about the fact that plastic is very useful at protecting food? Aren't the emissions from food waste very high? You've got 1 minute. I'm going to give that one to Dave.
Yeah, this is the reason why supermarkets claim they want soft plastic packaging to protect food, so therefore there is less food waste. Actually, the fundamental issue is how we have our food production processes around the world. If you buy some cod, if you're a vegetarian, you eat some fish that's caught in the Atlantic, chances are it's going to be processed in China before being sent back here. Actually, what we need to look at is how we do food chains. Tinkling with the edges about this, wrapping food in plastics isn't the issue.
1 minute. Well done, Dave. So we have less than a minute to go. I would just like to thank everybody for coming. We will make sure that we email you as much information as we possibly can, and spread the word. Tell everyone you know about the big lie, and please come and join us. We need more members, and I think that's it. If everyone would like to say goodbye, lovely speakers, thank you so much. Thanks to Nina. And thanks to Dave and Nihan and Marion in their absence. And thank you to Richard for our live streaming.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Rebel for life.
Yay.
Woohoo!
Bye. Are we off air?
Not yet.